Hello, and welcome to my video presentation on semi-structured interviews. Semi-structured interviewing is a data collection process for qualitative research. Longhurst defines it as a verbal interchange where one person, the interviewer, elicits information from another person, the interviewee, through a series of questions. Luo defines it as natural interrogation through conversation using a list of general ideas or questions. And lastly, Cresswell defines it as participants answering a few open-ended questions to get their views and opinions of the topic in question. From these three definitions, we can synthesize our own. Semi-structured interviewing is the use of open-ended questions to form a conversation with the interviewee about the subject of the study. The merits of using semi-structured interviewing for library reference services research are as follows. Semi-structured interviews are useful for studying a wide range of information gathering behaviors. They also strike the right balance of order and freedom. They're not as constricting as a survey, but provide more uniformity across all participants than unstructured interviewing. They are also useful for exploring problems that are relatively new, and thusly have very little research done pertaining to them. Next, I will discuss the procedure for conducting a semi-structured interview. The first step is to create an interview protocol or guide. Cresswell states on page 183 of Research Design, Qualitative, Quantitative, and Mixed Methods Approaches that an interview protocol should include a heading comprised of the date, place, name of the interviewer, and name of the interviewee, instructions for the interviewer to follow so that standard procedures are used from one interview to the next, the questions composed of an icebreaker question followed by 4 to 5 additional questions, probes for the 4 to 5 questions to allow the interviewee to explain their answers in more detail or to elaborate, space between the questions to record the response, and a concluding statement. This can be either a thank you or an acknowledgement to the interviewee for the time spent during the interview. Luo and Wildmuth, in their chapter on semi-structured interviews from the book Applications of Social Research Methods to Questions in Information and Library Science, provide a few different types of questions that can be present in a semi-structured interview. These questions can be divided into two groups: beneficial questions that the researcher should strive to include, and detrimental questions that should be removed from the interview protocol when found. Beneficial questions include essential questions, those that the interview has been built around and that directly address the research question. Extra questions, rewordings of the essential questions to use both for checking the interview's validity as well as in the case that the interviewee doesn't understand an essential question. Throwaway questions, used to put the interviewee at ease or to change topics mid-interview, and probing questions, questions that allow the interviewee to elaborate on their responses. Detrimental questions include affectively worded questions. These questions arouse an inappropriate emotional response from the interviewee. Double-barreled questions. These questions contain more than one issue in them. And complex questions. These questions are long-winded and unclear. They are less efficient in interviews than short, clear questions. Step 2. Set up the logistics of your interviews. Luo and Wildmoth define this as the myriad tasks leading up to the interview, including finding a suitable, unbiased location, a time when both the researcher and the interviewee are free, confirming the interview, sending out reminders to the research subjects, rescheduling interviews if there are any conflicts, and acquiring any recording instruments that the researcher may need. Step 3. Introductions and formalities. This step includes introducing yourself as the researcher, as well as introducing the purpose of the study. This is also the time to reassure the interviewee of their anonymity, get their permission to record the interview if you are using any audio or video recording devices, and answer any questions the interviewee may have. Step 4. Warm up. This step includes building a rapport with the interviewee through ice-breaking questions or exercises. Longhurst suggests that offering food and drink can also be an effective way of breaking the ice. Step 5. Administer the interview. This step is where the majority of the meaningful data will be generated. Use the essential questions and their probes to garner as much information from the research subject as possible. Step 6. Cool off. In this step, the researcher begins to wrap up the interview. The tone becomes more casual, and the interviewee is eased out of the conversation. Step 7. Concluding the interview. This step is the formal ending to the interview. It is a good opportunity to thank the interviewee for their time and answer any last-minute questions they may have. If you are offering some form of compensation for participation in the study, now is a good time to deliver the payment to the interviewee. Step 8. Recording the interview. If audio or video recording devices were used, carefully transcribe the interview in full to prepare it for data analysis. Creswell recommends that even if audio or video recording devices were used, the researcher should take handwritten notes as well, in the event of a technical malfunction. Longhurst cautions the researcher to be very careful with their interview recordings and transcriptions. The subject's confidentiality should not be jeopardized. Luo suggests that the interviewer record their notes in a two-stage process. The first stage should provide a rough sketch of what transpired during the interview, and then in the second stage, the interviewer should go back and use the sketch to record the interview in greater detail. Step 9. Coding and data analysis. The researcher should develop a set of codes to organize the answers from their interviews. Creswell suggests including codes on topics readers expect to see, as well as those that were surprising or unusual to the researcher. Once the codes have been established, the interviews can be organized by theme. From these themes, the researcher can make an interpretation of their findings. Some of the strengths of semi-structured interviews are that they are useful when research subjects or their actions cannot be directly observed. They allow for the researcher to have some control in the collection of data. They allow participants to provide additional information as they see fit, and they allow for interviews to evolve organically on a case-by-case basis. Some of the weaknesses of semi-structured interviews include that they are subject to the researcher's interpretation and bias, that information garnered from them is from secondary sources as opposed to being directly observed, and the presence of the researcher can alter subjects' responses to the questions. This concludes my video presentation on semi-structured interviews. Thank you for your time, and here is the list of references cited throughout the presentation.